The rain was coming down hard that afternoon, the kind of heavy, steady shower that makes the sky look gray and turns the city's streets into rivers of rushing water. It was a Tuesday, nothing special, just one of those long days in the middle of the week where everyone seems to be waiting for the weekend. In the middle of the busy city, the golden arches of McDonald's glowed like a beacon. It wasn't a fancy place, and it wasn't trying to be. It was warm, it was dry, and it smelled like salt, grease, and coffee. For a lot of people caught in the downpour, it was the only place to go. Inside, the noise was a heavy blanket that wrapped around everyone. It wasn't a quiet library. It was a mess of life. The sound of fryers beeping behind the counter mixed with the steady thrum of conversation. There were people everywhere. A group of teenagers in wet hoodies crowded around a table near the door, laughing loudly at something on a phone screen. An older man sat alone by the window, nursing a small black coffee and watching the rain slide down the glass like he had nowhere else to be. A young mother was trying to wrangle two toddlers into a booth, wiping ketchup off a small face with a napkin that was already tearing apart. The air was thick and humid from the wet coats and the steam from the kitchen. It was the kind of atmosphere where you could sit for an hour and no one would look at you twice. Everyone was in their own world, fighting their own battles, trying to stay dry, or just try to get through the day. It was a perfect place to disappear, and that was exactly what the man in the corner booth was trying to do. He sat near the back, away from the main flow of traffic. He wasn't dressed like a movie star. He didn't have a shiny suit or an entourage of people following him. He wore a heavy, dark coat that looked like it'd seen better days, and on his head was a simple knitted cap pulled down low. His beard was scraggly, thick and dark, covering most of his face. He looked like any other guy trying to get out of the rain. He could have been a construction worker, a teacher on a break, or just someone looking for a cheap meal. On the table in front of him sat a single tray. It held a wrapped cheeseburger, a small fry, and a cup of coffee. There was no fanfare, no special treatment. He had stood in line like everyone else, waited for his number, and carried his food to the table himself. Now he sat there, slightly hunched over, looking out the window at the blurry street outside. He brought the coffee cup to his lips, the steam rising up and fogging his glasses for a second before he wiped them clean with a cloth from his pocket. To the average person, he was just a face in the crowd. But if you looked closely, really closely, past the beard and the messy hair and the tired posture, there was something familiar about him. It was in the eyes. Even with the sad, thoughtful look he carried, those eyes had been on posters in bedrooms and on massive billboards in Times Square. It was him, the man from the movies, the man who knew kung fu, who drove fast cars, and who saved the world on the big screen over and over again. But here, he was just a man eating a cheeseburger. He took a bite of his food, chewing slowly. He wasn't in a rush. He seemed to be savoring the quiet moments, rare as they were. For someone who lived so much of his life in the spotlight, with cameras flashing in his face, every time he walked down a street, this noisy, crowded McDonald's was a strange kind of sanctuary. In a place like this, people were too busy worrying about their own lives to care about who he was. He wasn't a celebrity here. He was just customer number 47. He watched a young couple arguing, quietly near the soda machine. He watched the old man by the window wipe his glasses. He saw the mother finally get her kids to sit down. There was a softness to his gaze, a deep sort of empathy. He wasn't looking at them with judgment. He was looking at them with understanding. It was that same look he often had in his movies, the one that made people feel like he was the kindest person in the room, even when he was saying nothing at all. The restaurant hummed on, a machine of constant motion. The door opened and closed, letting in gusts of wet, cold air. The floor was slick with wet footprints. The smell of chicken nuggets drifted through the room. It was real life, unscripted and raw. The man in the corner finished his cheeseburger and crumpled the wrapper into a small ball. He took a sip of his coffee, his hands wrapped around the warm cardboard cup. He let out a small sigh, almost unheard over the din of the room. He checked his watch, a simple, worn leather strap. Time was moving forward, as it always did. He knew he would have to leave soon, back into the rain, back into the world where people knew his name and wanted a piece of him. But for a few minutes, he was just a guy in a coat. He was invisible, and for him, that was the best gift he could ask for. But invisibility is a fragile thing. It only lasts until someone decides to really see you. Across the room, a small child had stopped eating his nuggets. The boy, no older than 5, was sitting in a booth with his mother, kicking his legs against the vinyl seat. He had been looking around the room, the way kids do when they're bored, letting their eyes wander without a filter. He wasn't looking for a celebrity. He didn't care about box office numbers or fame. He was just looking. The boy's gaze had landed on the man in the corner. He tilted his head to the side, studying the figure in the heavy coat. The man looked up, perhaps sensing the stare, and for a split second, his eyes met the child's across the crowded room. It was a moment of connection, brief and silent, lost in the noise of the restaurant. The man offered a tiny, polite nod, a reflex, before looking back down at his coffee. He didn't know it yet, but his quiet afternoon was about to change. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to happen inside his heart. The restaurant was still loud, still busy, still gray, but the energy was shifting. Something was coming. The little boy sat in his booth, his legs swinging back and forth, his sneakers making a soft thump-thump sound against the vinyl seat. He was supposed to be eating his chicken nuggets, but the box sat forgotten, the nuggets getting cold. His mother was right there beside him, but her attention was far away. She was on her phone, scrolling through a feed of pictures and texts, one hand resting absently on the back of his baby sister's stroller. The mother looked tired, the kind of tired that sits deep in the bones, the kind that comes from working long shifts and raising 2 kids on your own. She took a sip of her soda and sighed, not looking up. To the boy, the restaurant was a huge, loud world full of legs and trays. But he wasn't interested in the noise anymore. His gaze was locked on the man in the corner. Adults usually look right through him. Well, they looked at him with that busy face that meant don't bother me. But this man was different. The boy had seen that face before. It was on the TV screen, in the living room when his dad used to visit. It was on the poster on the wall in his big brother's room. He didn't know the man's name, not really. He just knew he was the guy who fought the bad guys. He was the one who was always brave. But right now, the man didn't look like he was fighting anyone. He looked quiet. He looked a little bit lonely. The boy tilted his head, studying him the way a scientist studies a bug in the grass. He watched the man take a sip of coffee. He watched the man look out the window at the rain. The man's coat was old, and his beard was scruffy. He didn't look like a superhero. He looked like a regular person who might need a friend. A thought formed in the little boy's mind. It was a simple thought, the kind that only makes sense when you're 5 years old and the world is still full of magic. He had a secret. It was a big secret. He hadn't told his mom. He hadn't told his teacher. He had been carrying it around in his pocket all day like a heavy stone. It felt like something that needed to be shared, but you had to share it with the right person. You couldn't share it with just anyone. He looked at the man again. The man had kind eyes. Even from across the room, the boy could see that. It was a feeling in his chest, a little warm buzz. That was the guy. He was the one who needed to know. With a sudden burst of decision, the boy slid off the seat. His sneakers hit the tile floor with a squeak. He didn't say anything to his mother. He didn't tap her on the shoulder. He just started walking. The restaurant was crowded, and to a 5-year-old, the journey from his booth to the corner felt like a long hike. He had to weave around a chair leg. He had to dodge a backpack someone had left on the floor. He walked past the trash cans, which smelled like old pickles. He walked past the napkin dispenser. As he moved, he started to draw eyes. A woman in a business suit looked up from her laptop, watching the small boy in a yellow raincoat walking with such serious purpose. She frowned slightly, wondering where his parents were. A teenager in a hoodie paused his video game to watch the kid walk by. It wasn't strange to see a kid in McDonald's, but it was strange to see one walking alone with such a focused look on his face. Most kids ran or skipped or looked around for trouble to get into. This boy was marching. The boy didn't see the people turning their heads. He only saw the man. As he got closer, the man seemed bigger. The booth was raised slightly, so the boy had to tilt his head all the way back to look at him. He stopped right at the edge of the table. He stood there, small and determined, clutching the hem of his raincoat. Keanu felt the presence before he saw it. It's a feeling you get when someone steps into your personal space. He had been looking out the window, lost in thoughts about the past, about the rain, about the noise of the city. He blinked and looked down. There, standing by his knee, was a tiny human. The boy had bright eyes and a smear of ketchup on his chin. He was staring up at Keanu with a look of intense concentration. For a second, Keanu froze. In his line of work, people approaching you usually meant one of two things. Either they wanted a picture or they wanted to tell you how much they hated your last movie. Sometimes, rarely, they just want to say hello. He braced himself for the interruption, putting on his polite, public face. He waited for the phone to come out. He waited for the mother to come running over, apologizing. But nothing happened. The mother was still across the room, oblivious, scrolling through her phone. The boy just stood there. He wasn't holding a phone. He wasn't holding a pen and paper. He was just holding his own hands. The restaurant noise seemed to fade into the background for Keanu. The beeping fryers, the chatter of the teenagers. It all went a little bit dull. He looked at the boy, and the boy looked at him. The actor's shoulders relaxed. He saw no demands in the child's eyes. He saw no greed. He just saw a kid. Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. He didn't want to scare the kid off. He kept his voice low, matching the volume of the room. It was a rough, gentle voice. "Hey there," he said softly. The boy didn't say hey back. He didn't ask for an autograph. He took a small step closer, his sneakers touching the leg of the booth. He looked left, then right, like he was checking for spies. The people nearby who were watching felt a pull of curiosity. What was the kid doing? Was he lost? The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't the tension of a fight or an accident. It was a tension of something about to happen, something unknown. The boy took a deep breath, puffing out his small chest. He had made the journey. He had found the right person. Now came the hard part. He had to tell him. He looked up at the famous actor, and in that moment, he didn't see a celebrity. He saw a friend he hadn't met yet. He saw someone who would listen. The secret was burning a hole in his pocket, and the man in the black coat was the only one who could put the fire out. Keanu watched the boy's face change. He saw the seriousness there, the weight that a child shouldn't really have to carry. It made him curious. It made him want to lean in closer. He forgot about his coffee. He forgot about the rain outside. He gave the boy his full attention, a gift that is rare in this world. He waited for the boy to speak. The boy stood on his tiptoes. He reached his small hands up and placed them on the edge of the sticky table. He was ready. The whole corner of the restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of expectation. The man in the dark coat looked at the small boy standing by his table. He didn't wave him away. He didn't look around for a parent to come and collect him. Instead, he did something that surprised the people who were watching. He shifted his weight and turned his body fully toward the child. He planted his feet on the floor and leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. It was a posture of total attention. He made himself smaller, less intimidating. He was bringing himself down to the boy's level. "Can I help you, little man?" the actor asked. His voice was low and rough, like gravel crunching under tires, but it was gentle. It was a voice that didn't demand anything. The boy didn't answer the question with words. Instead, he took another step closer. He reached out with a small hand and tugged gently on the sleeve of the man's coat. It was a gesture so familiar, so trusting, that it made the actor's breath catch in his throat. The boy looked left, then right again, scanning the restaurant like he was checking for spies in a movie. He was taking this very seriously. "I have a secret," the boy whispered. His voice was so soft it was almost lost under the noise of the ice machine whirring in the corner. The man nodded slowly. He didn't smile or laugh. He treated this information with the respect the boy thought it deserved. "I can keep a secret," the man said quietly. "I'm good at those." The boy seemed to weigh this answer. He looked into the man's eyes, searching for something. Whatever he was looking for, he must have found it, because he took a deep breath and puckered his lips. He gestured with his finger for the man to come even closer. The actor leaned in. He tilted his head, bringing his ear down to the level of the boy's mouth. He closed his eyes for a second, waiting. He probably expected the secret to be something silly, something that only makes sense to a 5-year-old. Maybe the boy would say he didn't like pickles. Maybe he would say he had a loose tooth. Maybe he would say his mom was really a superhero. But when the boy spoke, the words weren't silly. The boy cupped his hands around his mouth, pressing his lips almost to the man's ear. He spoke for a long time. It wasn't just one sentence. It was a whisper that went on, a stream of words that only the two of them could hear. The boy's small body was tense, like he was finally letting go a weight he had been carrying for a long time. As the boy whispered, the people nearby tried not to stare, but it was impossible. They saw the actor's body language change. At first, he was just listening, his head tilted in a polite way. But as the boy kept talking, the man's shoulders dropped. The tension in his back melted away. His hands, which had been resting loosely on his knees, tightened into fists. The boy was telling him something real. He wasn't asking for an autograph. He wasn't quoting a movie line. He was sharing a piece of his heart. To the onlookers, the silence between the two of them felt like a heavy bubble. The noise of the McDonald's seemed to push them away, creating a private island in the middle of the fast food joint. The boy pulled back. He looked at the man with wide eyes, waiting for a reaction. He looked worried, like he might have said the wrong thing. The actor stayed still for a moment. He kept his head down, his chin almost touching his chest. It looked like he was taking a deep breath, steadying himself. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were wet. There was a shine to them that hadn't been there before. He didn't look like an action star anymore. He didn't look like the guy who wins all the fights. He looked like a man who had just heard something that touched the deepest part of his soul. He looked at the boy, really looked at him, and nodded. It was a slow, solemn nod, the kind you exchange when you share a burden. He reached out a hand, large and warm, and placed it gently on the boy's shoulder. He didn't pat him like a dog. He held him like a friend. "Thank you for telling me," the actor said. His voice cracked just a little bit, a tiny break in the armor. "That is a very brave thing to say." The boy beamed. His whole face lit up. The worry vanished, replaced by relief. He nodded back, imitating the man's serious expression. It was clear that whatever the secret was, the boy had been waiting a long time to say it out loud, and he had chosen this stranger in the rain to be the one to hear it. Across the room, the boy's mother finally looked up from her phone. She scanned the area and panic flared in her eyes for a second when she saw her son's empty seat. She turned her head quickly, her eyes darting around the crowded room. When she spotted him in the corner, her mouth opened to call out his name, to scold him for wandering off. But she stopped. She saw who her son was standing with. She saw the man in the dark coat. She saw the way the man was looking at her child. Not with impatience, not with annoyance, but with a deep, profound kindness. She saw the man's hand on her son's shoulder, anchoring him. She saw the serious look on her son's face, a look she rarely saw on him. The mother closed her mouth. She watched. She didn't interfere. A mother knows when something important is happening, even if she doesn't understand what it is. She could feel the gravity of the moment from across the room. The teenager with the video game had stopped playing. He held his phone loosely in his hands, his eyes wide. He recognized the actor now. Everyone was starting to recognize him. The whisper was spreading through the tables like a ripple in a pond. "Is that him?" someone whispered. "I think it is." "Don't bother them," another voice hissed. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted completely. It wasn't just a place to eat burgers anymore. It had become a stage for a quiet drama that no one had bought tickets for. The air felt still. The beeping of the fryers sounded distant. The rain outside kept falling, drumming against the glass, sealing them all inside this moment. The man reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a pen or a piece of paper. He pulled out a small, silver coin. It looked old, worn smooth by years of handling. He pressed it into the boy's hand, closing the small fingers over it. "For luck," the man said softly. The boy looked at the coin, then back at the man. He didn't ask what it was. He just nodded and shoved the coin deep into his pocket, right next to the secret he had just shared. The moment was ending. The boy knew it was time to go back to his mom. He took a step back, breaking connection. He gave the man one last, long look, a look of pure trust, and then turned around. He walked back to the maze of tables. his yellow raincoat bright against the grayness of the day. The man in the corner watched him go. He didn't immediately pick up his coffee. He just sat there, staring at the empty space where the boy had been standing. The lines on his face looked deeper now, but his eyes looked lighter. It was a strange contradiction. He looked sad and relieved all at the same time. The people in the restaurant looked from the boy to the man and back again. They knew they had witnessed something private, something they shouldn't have seen, but were lucky to see. The silence held for a few seconds longer, a respectful pause for a story that no one else knew the words to. The secret belonged to the boy and the actor, but the feeling, that heavy, beautiful feeling, belonged to everyone in the room. The boy climbed back onto his vinyl seat, the plastic squeaking under his yellow raincoat. He picked up a cold chicken nugget and took a bite, acting as if nothing had happened. He looked like a weight had been lifted off his small shoulders. Across the table, his mother stared at him, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and wonder. She looked from her son to the man in the corner and then back again. She started to ask a question, but she stopped herself. Some moments don't need questions. She reached over and wiped a smudge of ketchup off her son's cheek, her hand trembling just a little bit. But the real change was happening in the air around them. It wasn't a sound that stopped the noise. It was a feeling in a busy place like that. Silence is usually impossible. There's always a hum of machines, the crinkle of wrappers, the murmur of voices. But sometimes a moment is so powerful that it sucks the air out of the room. That is what happened now. The teenager who had been playing the video game had lowered his phone completely. He wasn't blinking. The two construction workers by the door had stopped mid-bite, their burgers halfway to their mouths. The old man with the coffee wasn't looking at the rain anymore. He was watching the man in the corner. Even the staff behind the counter had paused. The fry cook held a basket of fries in midair, letting the oil drip off, his eyes fixed on the booth. It was a moment of collective realization. The silence started at the actor's table and moved outward like a ripple in a pond. Everyone in that McDonald's knew who he was now. The recognition had finally clicked into place. But that wasn't why they were quiet. They weren't staring because he was famous. They weren't staring because he was a celebrity. They were staring because they had just seen something real. In a world where everyone has a camera in their pocket, where every sighting of a famous person is recorded and posted online within seconds, no one reached for a phone. Not a single hand went into a pocket. It didn't feel right. It felt like a violation. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, thick with a kind of sacred respect. The usual rules of celebrity spotting didn't apply here. This wasn't a show. It was a human being connecting with another human being. The actor sat alone again. He didn't seem to notice the sea of eyes watching him. He was staring down at the table, at the spot where the boy's hands had been just moments before. He reached up and touched his face. His fingers came away wet. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't wipe his eyes quickly and pretend he had allergies. He just let the tears fall for a moment, absorbing the feeling of what the child had told him. It was a raw sight. People are used to seeing this man on big screens doing impossible things. They see him dodging bullets and jumping from buildings. They see him as a hero who doesn't feel pain. But here, under the fluorescent lights of a fast food restaurant, he looked fragile. He looked like any other person who carries a heavy load. The secret the boy had whispered had cracked the armor. It had touched a nerve that was raw and exposed. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't awkward. It was supportive. It was as if the whole restaurant was holding its breath, giving him the space to feel what he needed to feel. The noise of the city outside, the sirens and the honking horns, seemed very far away. Inside, there was only the sound of the rain on the glass and the soft hum of the lights. A young woman sitting with her friends wiped her own eyes. She didn't know why. She hadn't heard the secret. She didn't know the actor personally. But she knew that look. She knew what it felt like to be touched by kindness when you least expect it. Empathy is a powerful thing. It travels through the air, connecting strangers. It made her chest ache in a good way. The manager of the store, a middle-aged woman with a visor and a tired smile, came out from behind the counter. She didn't go to his table. She didn't ask for a picture. She simply walked over to the coffee station and poured a fresh, steaming cup of black coffee into a cardboard cup. She placed it on a tray and walked it over to his table, setting it down gently without saying a word. She didn't want to interrupt. She just wanted to give something back. She nodded at him once, a look of deep respect, and walked back to her post. The actor looked up at the fresh cup. He nodded back at the manager, a silent, "Thank you," passing between them. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, the same way the boy had wrapped his hands around the edge of the table. He took a deep breath and let out slowly. The moment of intense vulnerability was passing, settling into something calmer. He took a sip of the coffee, closing his eyes for a second. The spell was beginning to lift, but the energy remained changed. The people in the room slowly went back to their food. The teenagers started whispering to each other, but their voices were hushed, respectful. The construction workers took another bite of their burgers, but they ate slower, thinking about what they had seen. The mother across the room packed up her kids' things, zipping up the baby's jacket, getting ready to leave. She didn't rush. She moved with a gentleness that matched the room. The actor sat for another minute. He looked around the room, really looked at the people. He saw them watching him, not with greed or obsession, but with care. He offered a small, tired smile. It was a thank you for letting him be human for a few minutes. A thank you for not shoving a camera in his face when he was at his most open. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few dollars, placing them on the table for the coffee and the meal. He stood up slowly. He was tall, his frame blocking the light from the window. He buttoned his coat. He adjusted his hat. He looked ready to face the world again, but he looked different. He looked less heavy than when he had walked in. The sadness was still there. It was always there, but it seemed like he was carrying it a little easier now. He had a secret too now. He was sharing the weight of a 5-year-old boy's world. And somehow, that made his own world a little lighter. The room watched him prepare to go. The rain outside was still pouring, but the grayness didn't seem so bleak anymore. The restaurant had been a place of strangers an hour ago. Now, they were all connected by a moment they would never forget. They had come for burgers and fries. They had left with a story that would stay with them forever. And as the man turned toward the door, every eye followed him. Filled with quiet, profound awe, the man in the dark coat stood up from his booth. He didn't rush. He took his time, buttoning his coat and adjusting his collar, preparing to face the weather outside. As he turned toward the exit, his path took him right past the table where the boy and his mother were sitting. The restaurant was still quiet, but the heavy silence had changed into something softer. It was a respectful hush, the kind you find in a library or a church. The people watched him walk, their eyes following his every step, but no one moved to stop him. No one held up a phone to record his face. It was an unspoken agreement, a collective promise to let him have this moment of peace. As he reached the boy's table, he slowed down. He didn't stop completely, but he paused for just a second. He looked down at the child. The boy looked up, his eyes bright, his hand clutching the old silver coin in his pocket. The man didn't say a word. He just offered a small, gentle smile. It was a smile that said 1,000 things. It said, "Thank you." It said, "I heard you." It said, "You are brave." He gave a tiny nod to the mother, a sign of respect to her, and then he continued walking. The mother watched him go, her breath catching in her throat. She looked at her son, really looked at him, wondering what magic had just passed between him and this stranger. She rubbed her son's back gently, feeling the warmth of his small body through the raincoat. She realized that whatever had happened, it was something good. It was something pure. The man pushed open the heavy glass door. A gust of cold, wet wind blew into the restaurant, rustling napkins and chilling the air. The noise of the city rushed back in, the sound of tires splashing through puddles, the distant honking of horns, the heavy drumming of rain on the pavement. It was a stark contrast to the warm, quiet bubble they had all been living in for the last few minutes. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't run for a taxi. He just pulled his collar up higher around his neck and started walking. Within seconds, the rain had soaked through his coat, but he didn't seem to mind. He walked with his head up, looking straight ahead. To anyone passing by on the street, he was just another figure in the gray storm. They didn't know he was famous. They didn't know he was carrying a secret from a 5-year-old. They didn't know that he was walking a little lighter than he had been an hour ago. inside the McDonald's. The glass door swung shut, cutting off the noise of the street. For a moment, no one moved. The spell was slow to break. The teenagers in the corner finally went back to their phones, but they weren't laughing as loud as before. The construction workers picked up their burgers, chewing thoughtfully. The old man by the window took a sip of his coffee, staring out at the figure disappearing into the mist. Slowly, the normal sounds of the restaurant started to return. The fryer beeped again, breaking the tension. The manager called out an order number. The mother began to gather her things, packing the leftover nuggets into a bag. She helped her son slide off the seat. He hopped down, his boots landing with a splash on the wet floor. "Ready to go?" she asked him softly. The boy nodded. He looked back at the empty booth where the man had been sitting. It was just a regular booth now, with a tray on the table and a crumpled wrapper. But to the boy, it was special. He patted his pocket, feeling the hard shape of coin. It was his now, a treasure, a reminder that he had been heard. They walked toward the exit, hand in hand. As they stepped out into the rain, the mother pulled up the boy's hood to keep him dry. She opened her own umbrella, holding it over both of them. They stepped onto the sidewalk, heading towards a bus stop. The city was gray and wet, the streets slick with water, reflecting the streetlights. People hurried past them, heads down, rushing to get out of the storm. It was a cold, miserable day. But for the boy and his mother, the walk felt different. The boy was skipping a little, splashing in the small puddles. He looked up at his mom and smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that comes from a place of peace. Back inside, life went on. The tables were wiped down. New customers came in, shaking off their wet umbrellas and complaining about the weather. They had no idea that something incredible had just happened in that room. They didn't know that a hero from the movies had sat among them, not saving the world from bad guys, but saving a little boy from a heavy heart. The beauty of the moment was that it would never be fully explained. The secret remained a secret. No one knew exactly what the boy had whispered. Maybe it was about his dog that ran away. Maybe it was about a bully at school. Maybe it was a wish for his mom to be happy. It didn't matter. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was a connection. What mattered was that for 5 minutes in a noisy fast food restaurant, two strangers had seen each other clearly. The actor was gone, disappearing into the city like a ghost in the rain. The boy was going home, carrying a coin and a memory. The people in the restaurant went back to their burgers and their coffee. But something in the air had changed. A little bit of kindness had been spread around, like seeds scattered in a garden. It is easy to think that heroes are only in movies. It is easy to think that magic isn't real. But sometimes magic is just a moment. It is a child walking up to a stranger. It is a grown man listening with his whole heart. It is a room full of people choosing respect over curiosity. As the boy and his mother waited for the bus, the rain started to slow down. A tiny patch of blue sky tried to break through the heavy gray clouds above the city. It was small, but it was there. The boy leaned his head against his mother's arm, feeling the coin in his pocket warm from his hand. He felt safe. He felt heard. And miles away, walking through the wet streets of the city, a man in a dark coat felt a little less alone, carrying the honest words of a child like a shield against the storm.